Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You're tuned into Newcastle Fast FM. Welcome back, everybody, to the Baker broadcast. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Abdul Haqq.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
All right, cool. Yeah, so we're just picking up where we left off last week. We're just developing and building on that conversation. Again, the views are of myself as your host, Wajid, and our guest, Dr. Abdul Haqq. And we'd like to also say to you that if you have any thoughts, any questions, we'd love for you to get involved with this conversation. Get involved. Let's discuss it. Let's pull this apart and see where we are going with this, because it does require that deep, introspective, and thoughtful engagement in this discussion. Just to recap what happened last week, we discussed we looked at the idea of Black history. And we looked at the idea of, not the idea, but the reality that gets put to us is when we look at Black History Month, it just tends to be day one starts with slavery. And we know that is not the case. The Black history goes back millennia, covering heritage, culture, and of course, very strongly with identity. We also looked at the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, the different ones, where they came from, their heritage. We talked about the Abyssinian king who gave refuge to the Muslims when they were being persecuted by the Quraysh, and stood up to them and said that he gave them refuge for the right reasons, and alhamdulillah, was there to as a safeguard against tyranny and oppression. And then we discussed around the idea of introspection, that we know the verses of the Quran, we know the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but do we really understand them, and how deep do those things go on our day-to-day lives? And we use this time, we use this opportunity to become introspective and to reflect upon and to our own belief system, really. That's what we were kind of heading into. I think that sort of covers everything. Yes, Dr. Abdul Haqq?
Yes. I think that's what we covered last week. And as you mentioned, I think when we look at the continuity of different levels of oppression and structural issues of racism that we're seeing, we have got some things that have just happened very recently that we can jump into and start discussing. But around that whole theme of introspection, we've got some angles to cover today as well, inshallah.
Yeah, inshallah. And again, we'll cover that towards the end of the show, inshallah. What we'd like to do is get straight into our discussion, because it's been a long week in a lot of ways, but specifically around what our discussion has been here. And the thing that's been hitting the news has been the statues, the desecrating of statues, or the pulling down and of bronze iconic structures that were resurrected to commemorate people of the past. And the most what we saw had happened in Bristol, and then we saw recently, the outpouring of, well, let's just call them what they are, racists, in my opinion, very much racists out there, ready to aggressively fight and so-called standing there claiming to be protecting the statues of Churchill. And I think, we could definitely start there then, Dr. Abdul Haqq, in the sense of this idea of what statues are and how they are part of British identity, because we have them all over the place. There's statues everywhere.
Yes.
In the UK, it's one of the things that we do here in Britain, in the Isles of Britain, and it's something that has really sort of brought up a point. But is it really an attack on these statues, or is it an attack on the ideology of what these individuals who have had statues made of them represent?
It's an attack on the ideology of what these individuals represent. And I think it highlights how divisive this whole matter can be and how polarizing it can actually be. But I think what's really important is, let's put a context first and foremost. We of faith, we as believers in this respect here. And we only have to look at examples of idols in history from a religious perspective. We see the idols that were worshipped by Abraham, peace and blessings be upon him, his father, and how that reverence and that violent reverence was around those idols who they worshipped. Now, some may retort and say, well, these idols and these statues aren't being worshipped by British society. it's very simple to see that what happened very recently is proof that there is worship. There is this reverence that these individuals are prepared to come, defend, fight, and enact violence and defend on that basis. So with the Muslims, we know that these statues of whatever kind, whether they are representing the historic figures of Churchill, King Leopold from Belgium, very barbaric king, as we know what he did in the Congo. When we talk about the ones that are thrown into the river and what's happening around the world, for us as Muslims, this isn't significant in as much that we are not attached to idols, statues of any kind. And we saw there was a defense of Gandhi statue because some were talking about pulling that down because of his racism and the like. So that distinction, that demarcation needs to be made immediately for our viewers who are not Muslim, that this is really not a non-starter, but it is not as significant as it is for those who are upholding and wanting to defend those statues as it is for the Muslims. For us as Muslims, it should be a reminder when we look at when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba conquered Makkah, what did they do? The first thing they did, they went into the Kaaba and they destroyed the images and the statues and the idols there, and they went around the region to the various false deities and they destroyed those. So they are insignificant to us as it comes regarding faith. But from a point of how we should look at ourselves, and I'll hand it back over to you at this stage, we were talking about the racism within our communities, anti-Black racism. We were talking about some of the prejudices that we have, and I gave an example of white privilege and individuals, white communities realizing their privilege and addressing it through these marches and solidarity with Black people in America and the UK and elsewhere. And I said on a microcosmic level, the South Asian community, which is the predominant one, the Arab community, need to look at their privilege within the context of the communities. And I move it to that state now and say, what monuments have we got in our hearts? What statues, what are we holding, metaphorically speaking, in our hearts that are preventing us from giving that up to embrace the deen and what it espouses concerning culture, religion? What is it that's preventing us from doing that? So we've got monuments. We've got our own monuments in our hearts. We can talk and point the finger at the wider society. And yes, there are issues with what those monuments represent. But what about our internal monuments that are obstructing us from really engaging and embracing our fellow Muslims, especially those who are in need? And this is the point I will stop on. We spoke about Najashi giving refuge to the fledgling community of the companions. Your Black brothers and sisters and children now need refuge from you.
Yeah, I think.
Are you going to give refuge to your brothers and sisters who have been oppressed within a society for centuries? Are you going to give refuge to them and stand up for them in the way that Najashi stood up for the early Muslim community when they came to him?
I mean, just from what you've said there, Dr. Abdul Haqq, you know, there is a bit of what we call colonial amnesia when it comes to these things, you know. And as you know, as time passes by, stories become legends. You know, there are certain fringe elements that get cut off and shredded off. And so just to really play the advocate, really, is it not just a matter of people who identify themselves as this is part of British history? You know, if it's there, we can talk about it, because if it's not there, or is that not just the same from a cultural perspective to not be looking and addressing the issues that these statues hold and represent?
I think there's an argument on both sides. Some say to retain the statues so that we can talk about the history. But what we're actually seeing is the history that is being spoken about is the victorious element of conquer and victory. And it completely obscures, it obfuscates the darker side of the histories, the racism of Churchill, the slave trade of some of these these historic figures and the barbarism that took place, like those who were killed in the Middle Passage and the like. King Leopold, who I've mentioned, we still see pictures circulating of some of the decapitated children because the father didn't mine enough or do enough labor for that particular day. So what about that? That conversation needs to come to the fore, because you cannot just talk about the heroics. Churchill being one of the greatest 20th century leaders because of what he did in the World War and against Hitler and winning the Battle of Britain and everything else that goes with it. That's just one aspect. Now it's time to talk about the other aspects. And if those conversations can be had and everyone can be educated without that sanitization that's taken place, then we can see together, collectively, do we need to redress history? Do we need to remove these monuments? Can that discussion take place? At the moment, it cannot, because it's so polarized that it cannot. So to answer your question, do we remove these statues? I would say there's a priority above that, and I'm going to come back ideologically as well. Before focusing on these statues, we need to remove that very ideological monument that depicts Isa, Jesus, white, blue-eyed, blonde-haired, who's been worshipped and who has been used within the Christian religion to subjugate a whole people as well. As the saying goes, Desmond Tutu, I think it was, who said it, or one of them leaders said it. When they came to Africa, they came with the Bible. We had the land, they had the Bible. By the time they left, they had the land and we had the Bible. Okay, so let's remove that depiction, that ideological depiction of Isa and the false impression that's given of Isa. That's the biggest monument that needs to be moved from a point of Tawheed, from a point of shirk in the land that we're dealing with. That's the first conversation. The other conversations are secondary, in my opinion.
And I think so. I think just come back to the idea of Churchill leading and winning the World War. I think what gets left out is the ethnic minority involvement during the wars. Absolutely. And I think that doesn't get the recognition of what it deserves, because if it wasn't without the ethnic minority involvement from what was called the empire, from the different colonies, all the rest of it, had that involvement not been there, then it didn't matter what strategy Churchill had put together against Hitler. It was never going to be a win. And I think that part of our history, it does get changed. And I think, like you said about the polarization element, when we look at these things, we don't look at the intricacies and the realities of what it is. And like you said, because I watched Denzel Washington's Malcolm X when I was quite young. And I say he was quite young because it had been out for a few years since then. But there is that element of when he challenges the Christian teacher or the priest in the prison, and the teacher calls him a devil simply because he's black and he speaks, and he challenges him on that, and he says, "Well, what makes you think that Jesus was white European? Because he's not. He's from the Middle East, you know."
That's right.
And these things they get overlooked, and this sort of amnesia, kind of this ignorance kind of floats around, and we don't allow it to take root, to sort of say, actually, well, why don't we look at this foundation first? Let's get the facts right instead of this legends and delusion, and actually get the numbers
and
there.
If they can't, sorry to interject, Wajid, if they can't deal with that, let's go back to the contemporary issue that you asked in the first place. If you want to talk about Churchill and winning the World War, and as you said, the minorities came from the Commonwealth, so-called Commonwealth, because the wealth wasn't common to the Commonwealth, it was common to England. So if we talk about that, then let's jump to the 21st century and what's been happening, and the travesty with what they did with the Windrush. Those individuals are saying, let's stand for these statues and we should all be together. Then you should stand, white Britain, who's standing vehemently behind these statues. You now need to say to government, beside your black brethren who came and fought and came over here, we need to rectify this situation with the travesty and disgusting manner in which you treated the black people from Windrush. You need to deal with that now, urgently. They want to have that conversation, and we see that what they've promised to do is enacted, and the legislation is put in place, and these individuals who've suffered and their families have suffered are compensated adequately. Not 21,000, that's nonsense. Okay, they're compensated adequately, and it's done speedily, almost as speedily as those who jumped on the buses and went down and stood by the monuments. Then we can say there's an equilibrium that's been established here. But that conversation is not being had. That needs to be had if they're going to say, yes, monuments, yes, what Windrush, because the individuals from the Windrush and those descendants have come past, they came, they helped us win the war.
Yeah, but then does that not lead to the whole point then, Dr. Abdul Haqq, that the protests are just further creating more turmoil, and we're possibly not heading towards the real change we want? Because, we talk about, that I know the Prime Minister has made some statements, but we've seen what happened, and is still an ongoing process with the Grenfell situation. And again, nothing has come to fruition of it. It again, as some of the writers have written, is a monument that's covered up, a monument of 72 people who sadly died in that fire. And so is this protest, is this method, just something that's going to flare up, causing a lot of aggravation, polarizing people, and not really allowing the real discussions to happen?
Another very good question, and I think this is one of the challenges that we're looking at today. There's again a polarization amongst Muslim communities as to whether Muslims should be joining in with the protests, lending their voice. And they've brought scholarly references concerning that, whether those references are within context of the Western societies that we live in today, or whether it's within the particular locales that they come from. That's a different issue altogether, but that's a debate that's raging as well. The point that we need to look at, there should not be a distraction from why people have started standing up and raising their voices, like the like of which we haven't seen since the civil rights time after Martin Luther King died over 50 years ago. That momentum still needs to continue, but it needs to be focused on the anti-black racism. And it needs to be focused specifically in the same way that we saw in the 90s with Doreen and Neville Lawrence. They focused on Stephen Lawrence's death. They did not look to the right or left to any other distraction. They focused on their son's death, and those who were with them campaigning, they stuck with that and didn't let anything come in and dilute that. Grenfell is a part of this. Grenfell should have been put to the spotlight. Sunday was the anniversary. Everyone remembers that horrific time, what was happening. I remember here being on the phone and everything. That should have been put to the fore instead of the focus and distraction with regards to the monuments. And I think that was quite deliberate in itself, and it allowed others to get distracted by that as well. So you're right. The protest in itself is a contentious issue. And I'm not talking from the Muslim perspective now. I'm talking about what is actually taking place. If that's going to stop, this galvanization that's taking place internationally, if that's going to stop, we're going to see a malaise again. We're going to see other issues come in. We've just seen now the recent decision that's come today, the Supreme Court, about LGBT rights and everything like that. And I'm not going to get into that now. But one of the things that keeps happening, the black issue, the black focus always seems to be lumped in with other causes and other issues. And then it gets diluted. So you've got the BAME now, fine, that this is something that they're saying when they're speaking, they bring all of these minorities together. I say the anti-black racism, the black cause has been around a lot longer than any of the other causes. And I'm talking centuries. I'm talking slavery to now. And Some may disagree and dispute and say, no, strength together, we all need to come together with causes. No, I think the black cause is enough to stand in solitude on its own and be focused on its own. And that's what needs to be happening. This anti-black racism now, and the drive concerning anti-black racism and structural racism, which has affected black people for centuries now in the UK and in America, that's where the focus needs to be. And we as Muslims, our involvement in that is that we stand up for justice. That's all. That's our involvement now. I don't want anyone to be accusing us, oh, we're being pro-black, pro-nationalist. No, as Muslims, our duty extends to enjoining the good and supporting whatever that cause is of justice. And the black cause is one that needs to be supported because of the oppression that is against black people society. We haven't even touched upon what's happened. We've had Rayshard Brooks on Friday shot dead. And I had an individual comment saying, well, his case is different from George Floyd because he struggled and he fled. But him fleeing and firing with the stun gun to just distract the police and everything. He was sleeping in his car, for crying out loud. Him being shot dead was unwarranted. And others might say, well, no, they needed to apprehend him. Then I will ask others to go and look on YouTube and go and look on Facebook at the case of a white individual called Jerry. And you'll watch this individual, Jerry, fighting a male and female officer, shrugging them off him, taking the baton of one of the officers and beating the two of them. They've got their guns on them, beating the two of them before going and taking one of their cars, stealing one of their cars and driving off. Was their gun pulled even once? No. No. So if you want to talk about Rayshard Brooks and he ran away and everything like this, no. He was killed on Friday. Remember, that's just gone Friday. Then we've got we found two bodies hanging in the last 10 days. Malcolm Harsh, outside City Library in Victoriaville, public square, hanging from a tree. Then we also have Robert Fuller, last Wednesday, 15 minutes drive away from where this Malcolm Harsh was, hanging from a tree outside the City Hall. Outside City Hall, both public squares, hanging.
And both young men as well.
Both young men, lynching. Then we had today the Tulsa police, and we know the atrocities that were committed in Tulsa, affluent black community, 100 or so years, just under 100 years ago. Then we've got images today. I saw just before we came on the show, 13 and 14-year-old walking along the street. The police pulled them up for jaywalking. And then you can see the violence with which one of them was manhandled. It was filmed by the neighbors watching. So I'm saying again, the black cause, the anti-black racism stands alone. It requires that focus and that attention alone, not to be put into a melting pot of a myriad of other causes, not to be distracted by the monuments and the statues in that instance there, which has taken place. And again, Grenfell is a part of that. It's a part of, I'm saying it's a part of that anti-black cause. It is a part of that. Let's not forget the images of this white family on Bonfire Night a few months ago. They did a depiction of Grenfell, put it on the bonfire. They filmed it. They were laughing because they didn't care, because these were brown and black people. There were a minority of whites amongst them, but they didn't count. They shouldn't have been living amongst them anyway. Let's not forget these images. Let's not forget these incidents as to why we need to focus on this one singular, important, centuries-old cause.
Yeah, and I think we were just talking before the show, and I've had a few conversations with black colleagues, and the thing that's most harrowing about the whole thing is that if you're black, it's potentially you next on that process.
As I've started, I started that hashtag Black Lives Platter. You get a platter of food, Black Lives Platter. Take your pick. Which of us you're going to? We come in all different shades and sizes. Black Lives Platter. That's what it is. Not Black Lives Matter. Black. That's as far as society is concerned and law enforcement.
Yeah.
Let's go out and take our pick. Which black guy are we going to get? Or is it going to be a female? Is it going to be a child? Is he going to be fair complexion? Is he going to be dark complexion? Is he going to be big? Is he going to be small? Doesn't really matter. We got a platter to choose from.
Yeah, to abuse from. Yeah, it's subhanallah. The thing that's striking me now at the moment with what we're talking about, Abdul Haqq, and I hope I'm keeping the discussion kind of in that line, that vein that we want to push it forward with, is that no rights have been given because of a peaceful protest, right? I know you mentioned Gandhi, and there are different opinions on him. The fact that he was chosen by the British and therefore he became their champion, and the others, potential leaders, were sidelined. And they were sidelined because they were more vocal and outspoken. But it wasn't a peaceful protest, They were continuously beaten and oppressed in that way. The oppression continued. But even if you look here in the UK, when we look at, let's say, the suffragette movement, that still required, violent protests. Women chaining themselves to gates. There was a woman who was killed during a racehorse. She ran out into it and got hit by a racehorse. It took so much energy and effort to do that, in order to get some recognition. And even at that point, it was the white women that got the vote. Ethnic minority women didn't get a vote at that point. Even though they were standing alongside them protesting. And again, that doesn't get seen and recognized. But in the 21st century, given that it doesn't feel like we've progressed in that way, what is it going to take to really have those honest conversations where we can really challenge those misconceptions and beliefs? Because it is going to take a society for that change to happen.
Very good point. And let's be clear. Protesting, the Muslim position is I think relatively clear. I am one who doesn't believe that you should initiate protests or the like. I don't believe that. I don't have an issue with lending support and the voice of support to a cause that's a just cause, from the point of enjoining good, forbidding evil, and the like. Regarding violence, let's look at this carefully now. Rioting and vandalism and looting, that's not protest. That's wanton destruction. That's not justifiable. And some are trying to justify it, saying, well, our bodies have been looted and such. You've got to understand why there's anger and everything like that. No, I won't go down that line. I won't go down that line. Violence in any shape or form in that instance, if it can be avoided, it should be avoided at all costs. That's for, and I'm talking widely, generally in anything. However, if violence is enacted against you, you are within your right to repel that violence and stop it. But that's not giving license now to say to those, we're going to go out with that as a motto. I'm saying that in any walk of life. I'm walking down the street and someone enacts violence on me and I've got the capacity, I'm going to stop that, repel that violence. And if I need to stop it completely, that it doesn't return, then I will do that if it's within my means. But violence in that instance and what we're seeing, no, that shouldn't be taking place because it defeats the cause. And what we're seeing generally is that the peaceful protests are those which can shift and make momentum. Someone's just put up All Lives Matter, and I'm going to address that and say again, that this detracts once again, that dilutes the message. And what we find is that a lot of non-black come with this particular statement, All Lives Matters. Okay, and actually, at the moment, we're not talking about All Lives Matters. That's the default understanding that All Lives Matters. But at the moment, it's black people being killed. So
I think there's a really good example that I read on the All Lives Matter thing, and I think it's important to understand that yes, nobody's saying that all lives don't matter, and I think it's very clear that we need to make that point. Black lives matter less, and that's why there's violence enacted on black people in that way. There's a very famous video of an English lady, an American lady, standing in front of an American crowd of women and saying that if any of you wants to be treated like a black person, as they are in this country, please stand up. And nobody stands up because nobody wants to be treated like that. And I think the best example that I read today, it was a beautiful example. It's like saying to a paramedic who's fixing somebody's leg, saying that all legs matter, but your leg hasn't been broken. So he's working on somebody, the paramedic, he is working on somebody whose leg's broken, and you stand there saying, well, my legs matter as well, but your legs don't need to be seen to. And I think it's...
Fire. The house is on fire. Your house is on fire, and you're asking them to help. And someone said, "But my house matters as well." But your house is not on fire, so it doesn't require that attention at a particular moment. So I think also on the issue of the violence and the protests, and we've got a perfect model where we saw a structure and a society dismantled, and that was the prophetic model. Okay. It was the prophetic model, and we saw the patience that was enacted then, and when force needed or defensive force needed to be enacted, it was enacted, and we saw a belief system change around. And that's one of the things that Muslims should be leading on. We should be the ones leading on that change with regards to ideas, with regards to beliefs in that particular instance. And if you've got the strength for force, that doesn't necessarily mean you need to use it. If your opponent or the system understands that you've got that and you choose not to use it because you want to engage on a level where you say, we don't need to do this violence. So you need to make sure structurally you're not enacting that violence, because it can go both ways and we can have chaos. But we're putting that to the side. You need to step back and rein that back in now yourself. And that's what America needs to do. The UK did it to some extent after the Scarman report, after we saw the riots in the 80s, after we saw the report come out from Stephen Lawrence about institutional racism. It still exists now. It still exists, but albeit to a lesser extent. We see it taking place within Islamophobia as well, on another issue as it relates to Muslims. So it's a lesser extent. But we as individuals, we as a collective, as Muslims, as wider society, we need to make sure that our focus is one. The cause is clear, and that we're organized enough, that we've got institutions, NGOs, institutions enough to say, we can evoke change at every single level. But if you're going to keep using force, as my colleagues and I used to say before in the past, brute force and intelligence, both are combined. But we do not want to go down that road. It's an unnecessary step to go down because we want everybody on board. And violence is not the way to move things forward. So again, the looting, the rioting, I'd say to anyone who's getting involved in that, one, you're letting the cause down. Two, you're detracting from George Floyd, now Rayshard Brooks, now Malcolm Harsh, Robert Fuller, those who've passed before. You are letting the side down. And I'll say to you this, if it was a member of your family, would you go out and riot and steal and loot? No, you wouldn't, because you know that would be a distraction from the main cause. So it cannot be justified. And this is not a pacifist position that I'm taking. Those who know me know that I'm not a pacifist in that particular instance there. So it's important that we emphasize that point. And also those who are going out, our non-Muslim colleagues who are out there and who are protesting, not to lose sight of why you are protesting. That's the non-Muslim colleagues out there. The Muslim colleagues who are out there or not, or lending support, not to lose sight of why you are lending that support, and also to look at yourself, because there's no point in talking about the macro elements of anti-black racism, and you're seeing it in your very household. You're seeing it around you, as we spoke about last week. And I did ask last week, and we said we want the audience to share. What have you done to evoke change within yourself? What monument are you going to move from within your heart? What are you going to move to enact this change?
Yeah, and I think just from what you're saying, you see, I think what sometimes people fear is that they're going to lose there's a scarcity mentality that if another group gets their rights, we're going to have diminished rights. But that's not how societies actually become more advanced. Because when you really want to know what a society is, you look at how they take care of the most vulnerable. That's the word I was looking for. And when you see how society looks after the vulnerable, then you know how that society is, generally speaking, because those are your fringe elements in the sense of that side of the spectrum and that side of the spectrum. But I think just coming back to your point in the sense that you see, this is like you said, it's a very emotional thing. And there's one thing, us sitting here very calmly discussing kind of what's out there. But when people are out there and, raising their voices, it does get emotional. And that emotion can override, and people do stupid things. And like you said, there's no place for it. There's no justification for it. But people get emotional and they get caught up in that moment. But that getting caught up in that moment is detracting, because ultimately the media is going to report that particular part of it, and not the rest of it. So, for example, some of the stuff that came out was, when the previous weekend it was all BLM rioters. This weekend it was people protecting statues, and there were lots of bad apples, only a few good ones, sort of thing this weekend. Whereas the weekend before was a few bad apples, but they got all the media to it. And I think there's one thing talking about accountability and responsibility, but that hasn't shifted so far, and it hasn't shifted now. And the way that reporting is going on now, it doesn't look like it's going to be shifting in any way. And I'm just trying to think about what is it that's going to need to be done to make a difference, to really look at it from a policy perspective, where, like you said, just because you're black and walking down the street and you see a police car, that response that you have as an individual is very different to a white English person walking down the street and sees a police car. They're two very different responses.
And I think I want to share that experience. Our sister Salwa Abdul-Razak, as we've seen, she said yes, all lives matter, and I think the point that you and I spoke to, I want Salwa to pay attention to that. We know all lives matter, and oppression is going on all over the world. But when we focus on the Uyghurs, we focus on the Uyghurs. When we focus on the Rohingyas, we focus on the Rohingyas. When we focus on Palestine, we focus on Palestine. When we focus on black people, everyone else is brought in. And when you look at the oppression that's taking place across the world, and you compare to the time span of oppression that has afflicted black people in the West, and if you want to talk about the African continent, it's approximately 50 years plus that they've come out from colonization and are still reeling from the effects of that to get themselves in order, then there needs to be a concerted effort and a focus. There needs to be that. And I hope that Sister Salwa and others can understand that. And then coming back to what you're saying, Wajid, let's look at the two in Tulsa today, the two young, the 13 and 14-year-old, who were treated quite violently and aggressively. Those who want to look at it, they can see it on the news later on. I know what that feels like. I know what it feels like to be 13 years old, walking down the road, as a number of individuals do, to be suddenly pulled up by the police. Even when I'm 50 yards from my home, I'm on my road. They ask me where I'm going. I point, my house is there, number 78. It's just there. We're at number 25 or something. Live just there. You can go, my mum's at home or whatever. They're not interested in that. So what they start doing is frisking you, putting their hands down. If it's female officers, putting their hands down the front of your trousers to see if you've got stolen jewelry, where obviously they're having a bit of fun themselves. You resist a little, as has happened on occasion. Then the physical violence starts from the female to you. The female officers were the worst ones, actually. And then you see, as we call them, bully vans. You see the vans come, the lights, the sirens. And when they come out of the van, they have eye contact with the police, the arresting police officer immediately. They don't have eye contact with you. And if they see the individuals nodding or in distress, then the violence that is inflicted upon you from the age of 13, 14 upwards I won't describe that here on the show that we're on now at the moment. And when you've gone through that innumerable times, and I'm going to move on to something to give a construct after this. When you've gone through that innumerable times, it can develop a sense of hatred and resentment. You hear a siren, even to this day. I don't have a criminal record. I thank Allah for that. Some who've watched my videos will know it's come close. I can go to even after that when they see they cannot pin you down, pinning other charges on you. And I will share this with you, Wajid, as a Muslim, pinning charges on you because they still want to control or see if they can get something from you. When I first came to live in Saudi Arabia 2002, I had to return to the UK and tell my family and have friends look after them because they said they're going to put my name on Interpol. And I said, for what? What have I done? I got back, was met off the plane. I had to go and report to the police station. They charged me with attempted murder. I said, for what? For who? For what? But they got my DNA, they got my fingerprints and everything. They said to me, okay, we believe your story. We're going to let you go. But I had to fly 3,500 miles back to answer, or else I would have been put on Interpol. And then they said to me, oh, we're seeing what you're doing in the public. We fear what happened to Malcolm X is going to happen to you. They let me go with that.
Just say that bit again. They said what to you? They actually said this to you.
They let me go because they said, we don't usually let anyone go who's been charged with attempted murder. I said, well, I haven't been involved in any attempted murder. They said, yeah, we can see that. But we fear for you. What happened to Malcolm X, we fear is going to happen to you. And they let me go after that. So when I say the police and the legislative bodies try to get into your head, I have not shared this on air before. And my colleagues can verify all of this. So what I'm saying is it can build up. If you don't have a firm resolve, and I add this, if it wasn't for this deen, if it wasn't for Islam, I may be a different character. I may be a different character. And there are black individuals, Muslims, who know what I'm talking about. And there are non-Muslims, female friends, male friends who know me from before, who know what I'm talking about. And I'm not saying this in boast. I'm trying to show a passion here to say, we have had enough. And alhamdulillah for this deen of Islam, because it gives you that fortitude to show restraint. It gives you that fortitude to use your intelligence based on the knowledge you've got. It gives you that historical backdrop of what the Muslims withstood and underwent at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and also the oppression that we see that's happened with other Muslims and then bearing it because of what? La ilaha illallah. And if it wasn't because of that, many of us will be in a different situation and circumstance now, because continued oppression. And Wajid, when it gets to the stage now, am I angry for myself? No. I'm looking at my sons now. I'm wondering, are they going to have to endure what I endured? And that brings out, if you look at your children and you think that they're going to be going through any harshness or barbarism, it brings out something within you that even worries you, because you know, I will die for my child.
Mm-hmm. As any parent does, you know, we live for our children. We would give everything up for our children.
So my thing is now, this is why I'm emphasizing the focus needs to be on those who have continued to receive institutionalized, inherited, structural, systemic racism for more than 400 years. And the societies that we're living in the West are geared towards that. The South Asian community, the Arab community are seen as higher up the hierarchy. So they've afforded a different type of preference to those who have built these societies, the black individuals, the black community. So my thing is, I'm an advocate for this at this present time because of what's happening. But I also as an advocate for other causes, Palestine, the Uyghurs, in their place, in and of their place. And Wajid, we need to look at a construct here. And I want you to listen, and I want the audience to understand this. I'm going to come from an academic perspective. When a society moves, there are different typologies of identities in any given society. And I'm going to give a quick example in that. I know we've got time, we're running out of time. So you've got the society, all societies want a legitimized identity. Okay, and I'm referring to an academic called Renani, SOAS, he did his PhD, and this is he gave some typologies of characteristics. Right. So every society wants a legitimized identity. What's that, a legitimized identity? Law-abiding, civic individuals who abide by the law, no problems, and they comply with everything that society wants them to comply with, because society has a contract with them. They allow them free education, medical care, whatever the benefits they afford in that particular society. But then when that society starts doing things that break that contract, that breach that contract, those legitimized identities can move into an opposite construct, a resistant identity. And that resistant identity becomes one that says we are resisting the society that we are in now because you've taken some of our rights, because you have you've restricted some of our rights. And let's look at some recent examples. What's happened in Hong Kong? Why did that law-abiding society, why did they go from many of them went from a legitimized identity to a resistant identity? And look how far they went. Then you go back to the yellow shirts. If you look in France, law-abiding citizens, why did they become yellow vest and start protesting? Because of price hikes and electricity increases and the like in that instance. Why am I bringing this to you? Where do black people fit in that? Black people, black communities have tried to be legitimized, law-abiding with what they've got, knowing that they are disadvantaged, knowing that they're disadvantaged. And the moment that that disadvantage is rammed in their face or in their necks or they're shot, they move very quickly to a resistant identity, which is a comfortable place for them to be. And it can be a rightful place for them to be because they have not been afforded the rights that everyone else has been afforded. Now, there are other identities within that mosaic that I've spoken about. We don't need to talk about those now, but from going from a legitimized identity, because the society, the government removed some of those rights, to a resistance identity, black communities have been straddling that for decades, for centuries now.
Yeah.
And what you're seeing is that white society and other brown members of society have now, in this element alone, become resistant in their identities because they've said enough is enough, having recognized what's been happening to a minority, a significant minority, and they've watched it on TV, they've watched it online, and they said, oh my gosh, while we've been having these privileges, these communities have been facing this. So that resistant identity has increased now, and it's covering a wider swathe of ethnicities, including white communities.
But I mean, like, even if you look at it from the sense of unions, right? Unions are there to ensure workers' rights. Yeah. So you work somewhere, you have a right to work in a safe space. You have a right to, healthcare. You have a right to certain provisions, etc., etc. You have a right to getting a proper wage, and all of that stuff that comes with it. And that's what unions represent, is they have that kind of setup. And I think, given what we sort of said earlier, because I appreciate we're kind of running a bit short on time, but if we could just sort of explore a little bit, just the last few minutes, in the sense of this idea of the statues of the idols we talked about within ourselves, because that was a very powerful starting point, I felt, and I don't think we've explored it, and I want to explore that because I feel it's going to lead on to the introspective element of what we'd like to do before the end of our show this evening. And it's when we talk about those particular things, what do you feel are the current things that are the most challenging for us to tear down within ourselves, given the current situation?
I think that one of the barriers and boundaries that we all have is that we are reluctant to step into the shoes of those who are facing that element of oppression the most. We need to stay within our comfort zone. Some of us now with social media, we can look at a picture, we can look at a video, we can have empathy for it, and then we can switch it off. What about those individuals who cannot switch it off? What about those individuals? So one thing I'd ask individuals to do, and if we can all do this, and I will even do it afterwards, I don't need to because I think we've gone through this already. If the audience, and I'd like them to comment and even write in afterwards, if the audience can stop and do nothing, don't look at their phones, don't do anything, just to sit for 8 minutes and 46 seconds in silence. Just sit and think about that period of time and how long that period of time feels, because you're doing absolutely nothing. You're not watching anything. You're not speaking to anyone. You're just sitting there. And think that you're sitting there and you're watching somebody's life drain away in that period of time, and feel that discomfort. Feel that discomfort, but you're in the comfort of your own home while you're doing it. If you can do that, you can begin a process of empathizing beyond the comfort zone that we like to place ourselves in. Switch off the TV, switch off the phone, don't have to look at it anymore. Do that, and then start realizing I've got barriers in my heart where I know I can switch off. You can't switch off. If you really have that empathy, and as a Muslim nation, as a Muslim ummah, we're told if, and this is about Muslims, if one part of the body is aching, the entire body is aching. Really? So let's talk about this now. If we want to talk about Muslims, let's talk about the Uyghurs. They haven't been at the forefront of the news very recently, but we read not so long ago that there's actual organ exchanges taking place with some of the Uyghurs. We haven't spoken about the Rohingyas, who still haven't been placed back within their a safe environment. Now, I'm not going to say all lives matter. I'm talking about them specifically. I'm not saying lump them all together. And when you think about how you've stopped thinking about them for now, and remember, from the Asian community, we were jumping up and down about Kashmir very recently and the oppression that was taking place in Kashmir. How many of us have switched off from that now? We are being governed. We're being governed by media and driven by a media. So therefore, those monuments that are there in our heart are being fed and led by external forces. We are not leading and controlling them ourselves.
Yeah,
I think Ali Hassan is saying we stand with Black Lives Matter, and I'll add here. Thank you for that. Jazakallah khair. Let's stand with Black Lives Matter, but not the organization. I want to make that clear. Let's stand with Black Lives Matter, the cause.
Yeah, I think, there's something you said there that's very poignant, and that's that 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And I think it got mentioned in our last, one of our viewers mentioned it, that, there's this kind of almost fetishization of, like you said, lynchings or other sort of horrendous treatment of people. And I think what's really resonated with me there is, if we sit there and actually look at it, how brutal does it need to be on our screen in a first world country for us to realize that something is wrong? I think it's the sheer brutality of it, that it's happening, like you said, right in front of us. It's almost like a reality TV thing. You're watching this person's life drip out of them, and they're pleading. It's not like they're passively, they're saying, I can't breathe, and that this individual's life has been drained out of them, and for what? And what is the outrage that rises in us? And if it isn't feeling that brutal, what is it that has desensitized us and dehumanized that individual for us to be able to look upon it, like you said, in a source of entertainment, and to be able to really, like you said, sleep well at night, because I'm all right, Jack.
If you've experienced that firsthand, and I can imagine how George was feeling at that particular time, because of what I went through. And it was my friends, who are my brothers in Islam now, alhamdulillah, I hope some of them are watching, who came to my rescue because they saw these guys police are going to kill him with what they were doing. As I've said to you before, I've got scars on my wrist from the cuffing. And this is reason I'm speaking. It's not because this is personal to me. I like to share my experience, but knowing what he went through and having gone through that a few times, when you are no longer in control of your body and all you're feeling is pain and you're losing consciousness and you're seeing and feeling the brutality and almost pleasure from the officers with the violence they're inflicting upon you in unison on you as a team. as though you're being hunted. That's a feeling that I do not wish for anyone. But there are going to be those in the audience from the US, from elsewhere, from America, from Asia, who have had that brutality put on them from officers who work in unison. And Sister Salwa mentioned, yes, it's not Islam. Islam is not the problem. It is we as Muslims who have got these monuments, these metaphorical, emotional monuments in our hearts. You know, and the question by Mizan here is asking, would it help if British Muslims had their own movement like BLM? We should be together as an ummah. We have core values. We have an ideology. We have a belief system. We have the code from the Prophet Muhammad's peace and blessings be upon him on how we should engage. It's a good question that the brother has asked. But what we're finding is that as Muslims, we are comfortable in our own communities, in our own entities, together. And we're getting to the end, and I want to say this: oh, Muslims, you've got minority Muslims amongst you, Black Muslims. There's literature I've got on my shelf here, in all of that literature talking about the racism that's been meted out to them and how it's a double whammy being Black and being Muslim. Like the Abyssinian Najashi helped the fledgling Muslim community. It's your turn, wider Muslim populace, to help the Black Muslim communities that have come to you, because they're being oppressed by a wider systemic force. And it's only together that we will be able to make our voices louder in unison and to defeat that systemic structure. And then also help those who may not be Muslim, who are oppressed as well, to defeat that systemic, that structural racism that they've been facing, and our forefathers have been facing for centuries.
Oh, subhanAllah. I think we're coming towards the end now. I just want to Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much for our viewers. Thank you very much for participating. Thank you, Dr. Abdul Haqq, inshallah. Jazakallah khair for keep your messages coming in. We do read them, honestly. We do go through them. I'm sorry we can't respond to all of them.
Can I say one thing quickly before we
Yes.
Sister Salwa, I'm not angry. Please understand, I'm not angry in the sense that this rage. No, I'm angry out of concern for us as Muslims. I'm angry out of concern for a people who have been oppressed and have not received the support that we should be receiving for centuries. So Jazakallah khair, Sister Salwa, for that, and I'll pass it back to Wajid.
Yeah. No, and like I said, like I was just saying, we do read the messages, Jazakallah khair, and we try our best to respond where we can. It's just about keeping the flow of the discussion going. But as we said, take 8 minutes and 46 seconds and give it some serious thought, and see. It's a long time, no matter which way you look at it. And we will continue this discussion, inshallah, next week. I just want to thank you all, and thank you, Dr. Abdul Haqq, for joining us again today. And inshallah, next Monday, 8 p.m. GMT, we'll be back here with the Baker broadcast, inshallah. And likewise. Sorry,
British Summer. British
BST, all right, okay, not GMT. All right, BST, yeah, got you, because you're not even in. So yes, the BST, Jazakallah khair, and inshallah, we'll pick this up next week, inshallah. By all means, any questions or any particular opinions you've got, please put them on there. We will go through them and we'll try and weave them into our discussion as we go on. This is, again, as we said, it's divisive, it's emotional, and it's about having this open discourse, having this conversation, and inshallah, we can learn from each other, and hopefully, inshallah, that learning makes us better humans, better Muslims, inshallah. So on behalf of myself as your host, Wajid Hussain, and Dr. Abdul Haqq,
Jazakallah khair.
And Jazakallah khair for tuning in, and inshallah we'll join you next week here on Newcastle Fast FM. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa barakatuh.